an example of an ethical website in its use of data, how can the big fish like Google or LinkedIn or Nokia be encouraged or constrained to treat the small fish startups, like I guess everybody in this room that wants to start up a company is not yet big, in a fair and ethical way? Bearing in mind that less than 10 years, probably except with the exception of Nokia, less than 10 years that your companies have been in existence, and you have gone from teeny tiny to immense very, very rapidly. But how do you interact with smaller companies, either in your apps or your APIs, to encourage them and treat them in a fair way?
I think that the algorithms that people get, these search algorithms, there's probably over 500 changes they say to the algorithm every year. So I think people working very hard to get, as accurate an answer, as relevant an answer back to people. And it's inherently somewhat social because it's based on what people are clicking on to tell us what's more relevant, what they're pointing to tell us more relevant. So for startups, it's getting distribution. We talk a lot about entrepreneurs, like getting distribution and getting known out there, and those pieces. And you've answered this question a lot of times. I don't know if you have.
Well, so what I was going to say is, so with this, so there's this great debate in Europe and in the United States and other countries too, but primarily in Europe and the U.S. right now. That has to do, it sometimes gets called like network neutrality, right? But it's this question about what are the responsibilities of the platforms to those that depend on the platforms, right? And it's interesting to me because it's gotten framed in the United States anyway as this battle about regulation of the internet. Like somehow should the government be regulating the internet providers to be neutral? And then why wouldn't you extend that same principle to search engines and require them to be neutral because they're an important platform? And so what's interesting to me is that it's a kind of a funny libertarian sort of conundrum, right? If you generally believe that the technology sector and technology companies have done well and have innovated quickly, absent the kinds of regulation that might have kneecapped some of the innovations that we've seen. And anyway, what the opponents of these principles, to me, seem to keep missing, the principles of neutrality, they seem to keep missing over and over again, is how much practical human freedom, the practical freedoms that we enjoy, as citizens in the West, comes from these principles of neutrality applied to the services we depend on. So, for example, we call these common carrier duties. When it comes to buses and trains and hotels and so forth, it's the idea that you can walk into any hotel and if there's an open room, you can take it. You can just depend on getting into a taxi, you can depend on getting onto a bus, depend on taking an airplane, because they're neutral as to their customers. And similarly, I want my phone company, for example, to be neutral. I want my internet service provider to be non-discriminatory. I want Google and LinkedIn and Facebook and all these companies like that to be basically when they're so important and such platforms, I want them to behave in this sort of old common carrier kind of way. And I think the question about that, what the question raises in my mind is, when do you need government regulation in order to make that happen? And I think generally the answer is, as rarely as necessary, as rarely as possible. So as long as companies like Google have things like the Data Liberation Fund, as long as LinkedIn thinks about itself as a platform that wants to be friendly to all comers and all apps, then we don't need regulation to assure that. But that really is your ethical, moral, and I think in a very practical sense, political responsibility is to behave in this kind of neutral way. I want my ISPs to do that. I want my application companies. I want anybody that I depend on to be fair and open to all comers, as in a kind of common carrier sense that we've gotten used to. Mezzo, I guess.
I just want to add real quick on the other side of this is the developer community is becoming increasingly critical to these organizations. And so, for example, there are regular hackathons, whether it's on LinkedIn now, whether there's a great one on veterans, how to support veterans, or Foursquare has a hackathon, where they are encouraging and supporting the ecosystem to foster development around their platforms, around their data, to make everything better.
Thank you. you. I think we're going to have to bring that to a close.